I have always believed that family comes first. Growing up with my older brother Jake in Colorado, we were inseparable. When our grandmother passed away 2 years ago and left me her beautiful house in Denver, I never hesitated to let Jake stay there when he hit rough times after his divorce. The 4-bedroom house with its charming garden seemed too big for just me anyway, especially since I was working in New York at the time. I thought I was doing the right thing, helping family when they needed it most. I never expected my generosity to be thrown back in my face by someone who had no right to judge me in my own home. Before I tell you how Jake's new wife Madison tried to kick me out of my own property, let me know where you are watching from and if you have ever dealt with complicated family situations like this. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe, because you will not believe how this story ends when the police showed up and saw my property deed. Let me paint you the full picture of how this whole mess started. When I inherited grandmother's house in Denver 2 years ago, it felt like both a blessing and a burden. The 2-story Victorian home sat on Maple Street with 4 spacious bedrooms, original hardwood floors, and a wraparound porch that grandmother had loved to sit on during summer evenings. At 35, I was established in my marketing career in New York, pulling in decent money, but not quite ready to settle down in Colorado permanently. Jake, on the other hand, was struggling. At 38, he had just finalized a messy divorce that left him financially drained and emotionally exhausted. His ex-wife had taken half of everything, including their shared apartment, and Jake was couch surfing between friends' places. When he called me that October night, voice cracked with exhaustion, I did not think twice about offering him the house. Our arrangement was simple and generous. Jake would live in the house rent-free, only covering utilities like electricity, gas, and water. I figured it would help him get back on his feet while keeping the property maintained. For 18 months, this setup worked perfectly. Jake would send me photos of small improvements he made, like fixing the squeaky front gate or planting new flowers in grandmother's garden. We talked every week, and I could hear the life returning to his voice as he rebuilt his confidence. Then Madison entered the picture 6 months ago. Jake met her at a coffee shop downtown, where she was reading a pharmacy journal during her lunch break. He described her as intelligent and beautiful with auburn hair and green eyes that lit up when she laughed. As a licensed pharmacist at a busy Denver clinic, Madison seemed stable and successful. During our video calls, she appeared charming and sweet, always asking thoughtful questions about my work in New York and my plans for the future. Their romance moved fast. After only 3 months of dating, Jake called me with the news that he had proposed, and Madison had said yes. They planned a small courthouse wedding with just a few close friends. I was happy for Jake, genuinely excited that he had found love again after his painful divorce. Madison seemed like exactly what he needed, someone who could appreciate his kindness and help him build a new chapter. But things started changing almost immediately after Madison moved into the house. During our weekly phone calls, I began noticing subtle shifts in Jake's tone. He would mention that Madison had opinions about the house's interior design, calling grandmother's vintage furniture outdated and the floral wallpaper in the dining room suffocating. At first, these comments seemed harmless enough. Most people want to make a space their own, and I understood that Madison might want to add her personal touch. The red flags became more obvious when Madison started interfering with my conversations with Jake. I would call on Sunday evenings, our traditional time to catch up, and Madison would be in the background making comments like, "Jake needs to focus on his new family now, not spend all evening talking to his little brother." The way she said little brother carried a tone of dismissiveness that made my stomach turn. Jake would awkwardly cut our calls short, promising to talk longer next time, but next time never seemed to come. By March, I received the news that would change everything. My marketing firm offered me a permanent position managing their Denver branch, a promotion that came with a significant salary increase and the chance to move back to my home state. I was thrilled about the opportunity and excited to reconnect with Jake in person after nearly 2 years of long-distance communication. When I called Jake to share the good news, his reaction was not what I expected. Instead of excitement, I heard hesitation in his voice. "That sounds great, Forrest," he said slowly, "but let me talk to Madison about the logistics. You know how it is with married couples. We have to discuss major changes together." The fact that my returning to my own house was considered a major change that required his wife's approval should have been my first warning sign. 3 days later, I packed my Honda Civic with everything I owned and drove the 18-hour journey from New York to Denver. The mountain views as I approached the city filled me with nostalgia and hope. I had purchased gifts for both Jake and Madison, including a beautiful crystal vase for the house and a bottle of wine to celebrate their marriage properly. When I pulled into the driveway of grandmother's house that Saturday afternoon, I noticed immediately how different everything looked. The garden was now filled with modern geometric planters that clashed with the home's Victorian architecture. The front porch, where grandmother used to display her collection of wind chimes, was bare, except for 2 sleek metal chairs that looked more suited for a downtown loft than a family home. Madison answered the door wearing yoga clothes and a facial expression that could freeze hell over. She did not smile or offer any greeting, just stared at me like I was an unwelcome solicitor. "Jake did not mention you were coming today," she said, her voice flat and accusatory. She made no move to invite me inside, instead positioning her body to block the doorway. "I called 3 days ago," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly, despite her obvious hostility. "I brought some gifts to celebrate your marriage properly." I held up the shopping bag, but Madison's expression did not soften. Jake appeared behind her, looking embarrassed and uncomfortable. "Honey, this is my little brother Forrest I have told you so much about," he said, placing a hand on Madison's shoulder. She shrugged it off. Madison looked me up and down with undisguised judgment. "I thought you would call right before arriving, not just show up," she said. "We have schedules and routines now." I explained about my job transfer and my plans to stay in Denver permanently while I searched for my own apartment. Madison's face grew darker with each word. "You are planning to stay here, in our home." The possessive way she said, "Our home," sent chills down my spine. Jake quickly intervened. "It is just temporary, honey. Forrest needs time to find his own place. Family helps family right." But I could see the conflict in his eyes, torn between loyalty to me and keeping peace with his new wife. The dinner that evening was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. Jake had prepared grilled chicken and vegetables, trying his best to create a welcoming atmosphere, but Madison sat rigid in her chair, contributing nothing to the conversation except occasional sighs and eye rolls. When I mentioned needing a few weeks to apartment hunt, Madison dropped her fork loudly on her plate. "Exactly how many weeks are we talking about?" she demanded. "Because Jake and I are newlyweds, trying to establish our married life. Having a third person constantly around is not exactly conducive to intimacy and privacy." Jake turned red with embarrassment. "Madison, please. Forrest is family." "I understand." Madison continued, ignoring Jake's discomfort. "But surely there are hotels or extended stay places that would be more appropriate for a man your age." The way she emphasized your age made it clear she viewed me as some kind of failure for not having my own home at 35. After Madison stormed off to the bedroom, Jake and I sat in the garage, surrounded by boxes of my grandmother's belongings that Madison had obviously banished from the main house. "I am sorry, Brother Jake," said, running his hands through his hair. "She has been under a lot of stress at work, and change makes her anxious. I wanted to point out that this was my house, that I had every right to stay as long as I needed." But looking at Jake's exhausted face, I decided to keep the peace. 2 weeks, I promised. I will find an apartment within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks turned into the most hostile living situation I had ever experienced. Madison transformed from merely unfriendly to actively antagonistic. She would rearrange furniture in the common areas to make it clear that my presence was unwelcome, moving my grandmother's antique reading chair from the living room to the basement and replacing it with a modern sectional sofa that took up most of the space. Every morning, Madison would emerge from the master bedroom with a list of complaints about messes I had supposedly made. If I left a coffee cup in the sink, she would text Jake at work about my inconsiderate behavior. If I watched television past 9 p.m., she would stomp around upstairs slamming doors to show her displeasure. I started eating most of my meals out, not wanting to deal with her dramatic sighs every time I opened the refrigerator. The breaking point came on a Monday morning during my second week. I had woken up early to prepare for interviews with potential apartment complexes, trying my best to be quiet and respectful. When I entered the kitchen, Madison was already there, sitting at the breakfast table with her coffee and laptop. The moment she saw me, her expression hardened into pure hatred. "I think it is time we had an honest conversation," she said, closing her laptop with deliberate force. "This situation has gone on long enough." I poured my coffee carefully, trying to avoid confrontation. "Madison, I have 3 more days. I found a great one-bedroom apartment near downtown, and I can move in this Thursday." "3 days is still too long," she snapped. "Jake might be too polite to say it, but I am not. We need privacy. We need space. We need to start our married life without constant interruption from family members who should have their own lives figured out by now." Her words stung, but I tried to remain calm. "I understand your position, but I have been as respectful as possible. I stay in the guest room, I clean up after myself, and I will be gone in 3 days." Madison stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You are 35 years old, Forrest. 35. Most men your age have careers, homes, families of their own. Instead, you are living off your older brother's charity like some kind of dependent child." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, someone who had generously allowed them to live rent-free in my own inherited property, being lectured about independence by someone who had moved into her husband's home after knowing him for 3 months. "Madison, I think there is a misunderstanding here," I began, but she cut me off. "The only misunderstanding is Jake's belief that family can take advantage of his kindness indefinitely," she said, her voice rising. "You are a pathetic 40-year-old leech. Get out of my house right now." The irony of her words would have been hilarious if they were not so insulting. A 40-year-old leech. I was 35, financially independent, and standing in my own kitchen, being berated by someone who had no idea about the true ownership of the property she was trying to kick me out of. That is when I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle or an awkward giggle, but deep, genuine laughter that filled the kitchen and echoed off the walls. Madison stared at me like I had lost my mind, which only made me laugh harder. "Did I say something funny?" she demanded, her face turning red with anger. "Try to make me," I said through my laughter, wiping tears from my eyes. "What did you just say to me?" I said, "Try to make me leave my house." Madison's confusion was palpable. "Your house?" "This is Jake's house. He has been living here for 2 years. That is when I realized that Jake had never told his wife the truth about who actually owned the property. In all their months of dating and marriage, he had apparently let her believe that the house belonged to him. The deception was about to catch up with both of them in the most dramatic way possible. Jake came running downstairs, awakened by Madison shouting. "What is going on down here?" he asked, his hair messy from sleep. Madison turned to him with wild eyes. "Your brother just claimed that this is his house. He is completely delusional." The color drained from Jake's face as he realized his lie was finally being exposed. He looked back and forth between Madison and me, clearly trying to figure out how to handle the situation. "Jake," I said calmly, "would you like to explain to your wife who actually holds the deed to this property? Or should I handle that conversation?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jake stood frozen on the bottom step of the staircase, looking like a man facing execution. Madison's confident anger was slowly being replaced by confusion as she began to process the implications of what I had just said. "Madison," I continued in the same calm tone, Has Jake ever actually told you who owns this house? Of course he owns it, she snapped, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into her voice. We live here. It is our home. Jake, I said, never taking my eyes off Madison. Do you want to tell her, or should I? My brother looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Forrest, maybe we can discuss this privately. No, I said firmly. I think your wife deserves to know the truth about the property she just tried to evict me from. Madison looked back and forth between us, her confidence visibly shaking. Jake, tell him he is wrong. Tell him this is our house. Jake opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, without making a sound. Finally, he managed to whisper, "The house belongs to Forrest. It was his grandmother's house, and he inherited it. I have been living here as his guest." The transformation on Madison's face was remarkable. Anger melted into shock, shock into disbelief, and disbelief into humiliation. She had just spent 15 minutes calling me a pathetic leech while standing in my own kitchen demanding that I leave my own property. "That is impossible," she said weakly. "You told me you owned a house. You said we would be living in your house." "I never technically said I owned it," Jake replied defensively. "I said I had a house to live in. I did not think the details mattered." The details, Madison's voice was rising again. The details of who actually owns the roof over our heads do not matter. I could have felt sorry for her if she had not spent the last 2 weeks treating me like garbage in my own home. Instead, I felt a cold satisfaction watching her realize how badly she had miscalculated the situation. "So, when you demanded that I leave, I said to Madison you were trying to kick the actual homeowner out of his own property." Madison's face had gone completely white. She understood now that she had not only humiliated herself, but had also been lied to by her own husband. But instead of apologizing or showing any remorse, her embarrassment transformed back into rage. "I do not care whose name is on some piece of paper," she screamed. "This is still completely unacceptable. Married couples deserve privacy. Jake, you need to choose between your wife and your brother." That is when she made the decision that would end this whole drama in the most spectacular way possible. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911. "I need police assistance," she said into the phone, her voice shaking with anger. "There is a man in my home who is refusing to leave. He is being threatening and aggressive." I almost started laughing again. After learning that I was the actual property owner, Madison was still trying to have me removed by law enforcement. The audacity was breathtaking. Within 15 minutes, 2 Denver police officers arrived at the front door. Officer Jackson, a tall African-American man in his 40s, and Officer Martinez, a younger Hispanic woman. Both looked like they were expecting to deal with a routine domestic disturbance. Madison met them on the porch, immediately launching into her version of events. "Officers, thank you for coming so quickly. This man," she pointed at me through the doorway, "is my husband's brother, and he has been staying in our home for 2 weeks. I asked him to leave this morning, and he became belligerent and refused. He even claimed that he owns this house, which is obviously false." Officer Jackson looked at me. "Sir, is this your residence?" "Yes, officer, it is." I walked to the hall closet, where I kept important documents, and pulled out a folder. "Here is the property deed, showing that I inherited this house from my grandmother 2 years ago. Here are the tax records, showing that I have been paying property taxes. And here is my driver's license, showing this as my legal address." Officer Martinez examined the documents carefully while Officer Jackson looked around the house. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said to Madison, "according to these legal documents, this gentleman is the property owner. You cannot have someone removed from their own home." Madison's mouth fell open. But he cannot just kick us out. We live here. We have been living here for months. That is between you and your husband to work out," Officer Jackson replied. "But legally, the homeowner has the right to determine who can and cannot stay on his property." The officers left after confirming that there was no actual threat or disturbance, just a family disagreement that needed to be resolved privately. Madison stood in the living room, looking like she had been hit by a truck, while Jake sat on the couch with his head in his hands. "I cannot believe you lied to me about owning this house," Madison said to Jake, her voice hollow. "What else have you lied about?" "I did not lie exactly," Jake protested weakly. "I just did not explain the full situation." "You let me make a fool of myself," Madison continued. "I called the police on your brother in his own house."